only see normal, stable, functioning people who have really been hit in the face with some of the hardest stuff that can happen to you, which is grief and loss. And I see patients who've been given a very serious diagnosis that's going to require a lot of change in their life, a lot of decreasing their fears if they're going to evoke their will to really heal themselves. I work with patients who are dying, who want to do that naturally at home. That was why I went to study with Mother Teresa, to really see a lot of natural death. And while that's not part of my topic, it is perfectly safe. The body does know how to release the spirit from the body. The whole time I was there, I never saw anyone in pain. And she has nothing, not even aspirin. They were uncomfortable. But I work with people who are dying to do that at home and safe. Most of my clients are people who have survived a friend or family member's death that was from a long lingering illness or sudden death, murders and suicides. And then something in my profession that's called quasi-deaths. And they happen to us and we don't realize what's really happening because no one actually died. But a mastectomy is a grief and loss issue, amputation, hysterectomy, infertility, a grief and loss issue where nobody died, but you will go through the same stages of grief and loss. How I got into this work was I got slapped in the face wide awake, the way some of you have. The most important person in my life died when I was 29, and I was already a therapist, and I realized that they take people to Via Rosa who felt and acted the way I felt and acted, and that's just normal grief. When your mother dies, when your child's killed, when you have an assault on your dreams about how things are going to be. And that's why I went into this work, to say if you can hurt this badly, what is psychology doing to help normal people who are almost driven to the brink over just normal things that happen? And when I was in graduate school, I read a book called The Magic Mountain. And in it, Thomas Mann had written this one line that said, "A person's death is more his survivor's affair than his own." I thought, well, that's easy to say. I'm sure it's hard. I have done this long enough to know, with dying people and with survivors, it is easier to die than to be the one watching it. Some of you are nodding already. And it is harder to grieve someone than to really let go of your own life. And that's why I got in it. And what seems to make grief and mourning so incredibly difficult is it is composed of almost every emotion that's hard to feel. Fear, shock, denial, anger, guilt, depression, loneliness, fears, abandonment. And then you add on it, in this culture, death isn't talked about. Not at all. I don't think I'd have a job any place but the United States, because other cultures do know how to grieve. When you watch the news and you see the Mexican earthquake or the Peruvian mudslide, and you see those people pulling their hair and tearing their garments and throwing themselves on the casket, that is healthy grief. You have been kicked harder than you're ever going to get. But in this country, we don't. Some of it's British inheritance. Jacqueline Kennedy, I think, cemented how aristocratic Americans grieve. She just stood there. And how she cried was this. And that seemed to tell us this is how Americans should do that. And that is why I have a job, because that's what we do. We try to be brave. Or people call me sometime in the crisis saying, I've got to go see my father. They say he's not going to last the day. You know, what should I do? I don't want to cry. I don't want to break down. Why is it you don't want to do that? Why do you not want to be real? Is really the only way out of grief is through it. And in this country, blacks have it easiest in our culture, then Hispanics, but they're becoming anglicized. You remember when the body, some of you are older, that you used to have your aunt's body at the house? Then there wasn't a lot of denial. Lots of black cultures still scream and wail while it's happening. Then you aren't needing to get it out later. But this culture now doesn't. And some of you know the home scale that prioritizes the worst thing that can happen in your life. And 3 of the first 5 are about death. Death of a child is the absolute worst thing that will ever happen to you. Loss of your future. Death of a spouse is second, you lose your present. Fourth is death of a sibling or parent, which you lose your past. But the other two in between there are quasi-deaths. Divorce is a grief and death issue. And what happened in the 60s was that Elisabeth Kübler-Ross discovered that grief and loss has phases to it, that people go through stages, and you can delineate them. And she wrote all this up, and it seems to help a lot of people understand their grief. Again, the way this culture makes it harder for us is when I tell you that the first stage is shock and denial. Now this is whether you're told that you have something terribly wrong with you, or someone you love is dying or has just died. The first reaction is shock and denial. And when I tell you that this lasts anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months, a light bulb ought to go off, because in this culture, in about 6 weeks, people start saying, well, come on, I mean, you know, you got to get back to normal. I mean, it's happened, you've got, now if it's, to say 2 weeks to, if you have known all along that grandmother had cancer and she's going down and down, that's when you shorten it. If you just get a phone call and it's happened. When it's sudden, it usually takes about 90 days before you even are back on the planet that this has really happened to you. So the fact that at work, if your husband dies, they may give you 1 or 2 weeks. The implication there is to say, you know, you ought to get over this now. But families will start, because we don't want to talk about it. It's so in the closet. So your friends start saying, come on, you've got to get over this. If we really knew, it takes about 3 months before you even have arrived back on the planet to know that this has really happened to you. Yet you're getting these messages, what's wrong? And during the shock and denial, the features to me are more located here, because this is where we sense, you can't hear it, I don't want to hear this, you can't say it, my mother, you lock in here. Throat tightness, you talk about the future in unrealistic terms, you start talking about what we're going to do at Christmas, and they're not going to be here at Christmas. A 40% hearing loss in the first 90 days. Now, how are you going to work if 40% of the time it's not went in one ear out the other? It's went in and there's such a loud internal dialogue, this has happened to me, this has happened to me, that it never really registers. And it makes you feel, people tell you they told you something, you don't remember they told you. Lots of feelings that you're dazed, that you're lost, that you're stunned, that you're very helpless. Then when you move out of that, the next stage is anger. And this in our culture is real hard to surface. First of all, culturally, we don't like to express anger. It's not ladylike. Women have a lot of trouble being angry. And it's unchristian. There are a lot of things that tell us we're not supposed to be angry, but the truth is you have been hit so hard. Somebody must be to blame here. Things this major can't happen without somebody being to blame. And it's either the police's fault, they didn't do more, the doctors could have done more, it's God's fault, you may think it's your fault. But for me, getting people to get in touch with the fact that they're angry, it's irrational. How could you be angry at your father for dying? Because you're the one stuck here in this kind of pain. And the truth is you are. Or how could you be angry at your husband for getting killed in a car wreck? Because it has messed up what you thought your life is going to be like. But it is irrational to say, well, he didn't intend to get killed. And the third stage is bargaining. Oh, the anger stage lasts 3 to 6 months. Now, what is this starting to tell you about how the employer is seeing it, how your friends are seeing it? If this one is somewhere from 3 to 6 months, that you're either not getting angry, which is eating you up, you're very tight, or you are getting angry and nobody understands. All that happened was the mayonnaise spilled on the floor, and you went into some incredible, rageful thing about it. It's unresolved anger at somebody must be to blame if this tragic a thing can have happened to me. The third stage is bargaining. And in the bargaining stage, you want to make deals. If the doctors will just, even if the person's already dead, but if you're told someone has a very serious illness, or you do, you want to make deals. If God will just make this not be true, you're going to start doing volunteer work at the hospitals, or you're going to go back to church. You're going to go to confession again. If the doctors will just make it not true, you're going to help out at the hospitals. You're going to make all sorts of deals to try to get out of this. This can't really be happening. And that lasts about 3 months. And that expands depending on if there is a chance. If you got a phone call and someone has died, you won't bargain as long. But you still do. At least 3 or 4 weeks you do that. You wake up in the morning and the first thought is, if this would just not be true. And the 4th stage is depression, massive depression. And when people have asked me, how is grief different from just depression? I think it's about, when it's a death and grief issue, it's all you think about, and you always feel this bad. When it's a more generalized depression, whenever you think about it, you feel this bad. But with grief and loss and death, it's always in the unconscious mind going on. This has really happened. This is when it moves further. To me, the symptomatology is very interesting psychologically. When you don't want to hear it, when you're in shock and denial, you don't want to hear it, you don't want to say it. You seem to get sore throats, earaches, you get headaches, all this area. But as it moves down into depression, somatically, it moves down into your gut. Now you've got it. You've been angry, you've tried to make deals, it's true, and it's never going to change that it's true. This is where you start getting preoccupied with the deceased, tremendous inability concentrating. You hear it now, but tremendous inability to concentrate. Everything seems irrelevant that people say. People say, we've got an emergency in computer center. There is no emergency that happens in a computer center. You know what emergency is. You can't respond to anybody else's stuff unless it's death. In fact, it makes you angry that they're all upset about, the thing wasn't ready at the cleaners, now they're going to have to wear something else. And you really have enough, you go back in here, you want to really harm them. Say, do you know, or they're telling you how angry they are at their mother, and you really want, people come in saying, I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to scream, I don't have a mother to even get angry at. Thinking, why am I so rageful? This is part of the anger you haven't expressed yet. But as it moves down your body, this is when you get eating disorders. You either stop eating or eat too much. You get sleeping disorders. You either stop sleeping or sleep too much. Lots of fatigue. And then either an inability to stay involved in social and recreational things, or a frantic frenzy to be involved in other things. And this stage, my friends, takes somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years. And this is why people are not aware, what is wrong with me? I mean, Mother died a year ago. You've just now, you're working through it. All this has got to happen before you're going to get to acceptance. And quite frankly, the real truth is you don't ever get over it. You get used to it. That's the best it gets. You get used to the fact that you had a sister and you lost a sister. You don't ever get over it. And that's not bad news. In fact, you don't have to give up your love and your grief. Forgetting is not part of healing. A thumbnail rule that I give people when they say, how long is this going to last? I say, well, it's going to take you 365 days just to get the scab on the wound. And that's if nothing hits it, if there's no lawsuit about it, if there's no incredible harangue with the family about inheritance, if nothing hits it, if you don't find out it might have been different than they told you it was, it's going to take 365 days to the day, because you've got to walk through the first Christmas, the first Mother's Day, the first anniversary, the first Valentine's Day, all these times that were the time you were with that person. And those days, as you can imagine or already know, are excruciating. The first birthday you don't need to get anything. First one of your birthdays that isn't going to happen. Christmas seems to be the worst, because this is a time we all get together, and the one that's not here is very obvious all the time. But it's going to take you, the anniversary day seems to be even harder than Christmas. You may say you knew what you did last Christmas. You know exactly when you got that phone call or when you were there and it happened. Getting through the anniversary day that the person died, or that you were told that you have this disease, or that you were told you cannot conceive. We're doing quasi-deaths too. The actual day becomes magnanimous to people. But it's in between the second and third year that you start to have a sense that there are new things you're interested in. A new you starts blooming. Usually people don't go back to the other one, the old self. You start making new friends. You find that people who don't know something about this, it's a little hard to be friends with. They really don't understand when you talk about something that was this important in your life. And the model works even if we take something baby, like you lost your favorite keychain. I mean, you can't get less significant than that compared to death. Your first response when you can't find it is, here, I know I had them. This can't be happening. So I had them right here, and it's somewhere in this stuff. And you start doing shock and denial. This can't have happened, I know. Then you move into anger. It's really your fault because you started talking to me the minute I came in the house. If you just let me put my stuff down, this wouldn't have happened. And you start getting angry here or getting angry at yourself. I'm so stupid, and giving yourself negative messages. It's somebody's fault here. And then you go into bargain. You're going to make deals even over the keychain. God will just let you find this keychain. You're going to really make it up to him. Or if you'll just find this keychain, you're going to start now putting it exactly in one place. You're going to make a deal with fate or something. And then you move down in, you're right, it's gone. The lucky favorite gift keychain is gone. And it's a while before you go get another keychain. Sometimes that's punishing yourself. You don't get to have a neat keychain if you're going to lose it. And that's doing, who's to blame here? I'm to blame, I wasn't careful enough. The significant part of this is to know how long it lasts, because the culture and your family and you yourself don't cut yourself enough slack. In my class, I teach the psychology of death and grief at 2 nursing schools, and sometimes I'll get them to get etiquette books from 100 years ago and start bringing them up about every 10 years and read what the customs say. Who writes these things? That now they say after about 90 days is when you can date again. That's what Emily Post says now. That's a 90 ruling. And knowing that this stage is up to 3, you've just now become aware that it's really true. How are you going to date when you've still got this and this and this and this to go, and you talk about it all the time? Or if you just, how are you even going to hang out with friends when you've lost anyone? You're going through all this, and it's going to be quite some time. And a way I like to conceptualize it, I think this is taller than I am tall, is that psychology has always known that normal behavior under normal circumstances is normal. That's how we get our definition. And that people act in weird, abnormal behavior under normal circumstances is abnormal. That's how we get that definition. People being weird when things are normal is weird. But I think what we're starting to know about really tough things that happen in our lives, acting normal when you're in a grief situation is abnormal. My mother once, I asked how this woman was in my town and how Lucy was after she had backed over her grandbaby, and my mother said, it's so sad, you know, she actually had a breakdown. They had to take her to the hospital. I should hope so. I think that's a very normal response. If she said, oh, she's fine, she's back at the bridge club, and acting normal when abnormal things have happened is abnormal. You're going to get sick. But also, acting nuts when nut stuff has happened is normal. You know, if your child got killed in a soccer accident, you're acting weird. That's pretty weird, a 5-year-old getting killed in a soccer accident. Remember that happened in San Antonio. How can a 5-year-old get killed in a soccer accident? Acting weird when weird things have happened is normal. You know, when those parents were saying things to me like, you know, I just feel like I have to go to the cemetery every single day, and sometimes 2 and 3 times a day. You know, isn't that abnormal? Saying, given the circumstances, I don't think so. I don't think so at all. No, that doesn't surprise me. Circumstances that can, oops, sorry about that, that can exacerbate these stages. If it's a murder, this is going to get extended. Your anger. Somebody really was to blame. And it gets worse either way. If they don't find them, you're in a lot of rage. And if they do find them, you're going to be in a lot of rage. If it's a suicide, besides extending this tremendously, the reason you extend this tremendously is because you have to throw in guilt and blame and shame as well in this culture. When it's a long, lingering illness, this goes on a longer time. We're just going to try one more cure, one more thing we're going to do. When it's sudden, this is where you lock for a longer period of time. Everything was fine at 2:30. At 3 o'clock, your whole life has changed forever. Now, what you do with grief and loss, the first BALM, B-A-L-M, is to normalize, what I'm telling you today, is to normalize the library of knowledge we have about grief and loss. That the fact that you are terribly rageful, why should you be rageful that this has happened to you? You are. It's one of the stages. To normalize it for people, to explain it to them, to give them, you know, if the doctor gives you a pill that's going to make your urine blue and doesn't tell you, you really think you're sicker than what you went to see him about. But if he says instantly this pill's going to solve it, but your urine's going to turn blue, you go, blue urine, just like he said. Isn't that interesting? And if you've been told these things are going to happen to you, you aren't startled and frightened by your own symptoms. If parents are told the divorce rate goes from 51% is the divorce rate at this time in our country. If you lose a child, the divorce rate goes to 83%. That is like blue urine, though, to say, why in the, God, Peg, why are you telling us this now? Because I'm telling you, if nothing was wrong before this death, don't do anything for at least 2 or 3 years. It's not anything to do with your marriage. It's about the fact that men and women, as you might imagine, and all people, cycle through these faster and slower at different rates. Men do real well at this. It's acceptable. Sometimes men will start here. They get the phone call that something's happened to their dad, and they start getting rageful right then. It's just easier for men to go to that stage in this culture sometimes. Women have a lot of trouble getting to it. Men don't usually stay here as long, whereas women do. They need to internalize a lot of it. But to normalize it first for you and to ease up on yourself. If you're doing weird things, a pretty weird thing has happened. Cut yourself some slack. If it seems like it's going on too long, it's been 6 months, know that you're just now getting through the second stage in about 6 months. But then to help people externalize their grief, if you don't talk about it, it stays right in here. It has to come out here for you to own it, that you were John's wife and John is dead. You have to have heard it, seen it, you have to have written widowed in there. Part of your taking it in that this has really happened to get you out of shock and denial is the number of times you've heard it, said it, written it. And our culture doesn't allow for that. Look how many times people say, oh God, I feel so bad. I asked her how her mother was doing and she had died. I just wanted to die myself. And she looked like she was going to cry. Right. That's the normal response to having to say, my mother died. And to say, oh, I'm so embarrassed. That's part of her healing, is to have to own that. And why are we so uncomfortable? So I just didn't know what to say. You have to say anything. Just say, bless your heart. First of all, there isn't anything to say. There's a wonderful line that says about grief and loss, if every word is not enough, any word is too much. You don't need to say anything but bless your heart. It's that we're uncomfortable with it. We have a friend who's had a sister killed, and you go over to see her, and the minute she starts to cry, you want to say, now let's do something happy. Let's go to a movie. What you're saying is, let's not do this. I don't want to do this. You're uncomfortable with tears. Why is that? because we're all uncomfortable. What's really happening for those of us who are trying to help our family members? Death and grief pulls up, first of all, how do you feel about the fact that you're mortal? There is no harder problem to face than that we are mortal. Then what do you really think about immortality? Do you really believe everybody goes up in the skies with Jesus? When they're not here for you, somehow it's a little harder to believe that. And what are your... So you're going to have to face your own mortality, what you think about immortality. What is the function of suffering on this planet? Is everybody going to have to go through stuff like that? Those are the hardest questions about human existence. And every time there's a death or a quasi-death issue, you have to think again about those things are the hardest things to think on. What does it mean that I'm mortal? Why is there suffering? Does life have meaning? We would rather think about what time the movie starts, and it's just easier. And that's what's getting stirred up. That's why grief and loss is always spiritual first aid as counseling. Not religious first aid, but spiritually. Those are the questions you're going to have to answer. What do you think? Where is your loved one now? You have to work that through. What was most frightening to you about that? And working through, there's always some kind of self-blame somewhere. In Catholics, I find that the old school Catholics believe that if you do good, you'll get good. If you do bad, you get bad. Well, you just got bad. So did you deserve that? There's a lot of feeling if bad things happen to us, then we deserve that. But Protestants just do a switch of that. They believe that the work ethic, if I just work hard enough, it's all going to work out for me. Pay my taxes, work hard, that's how it works. And it didn't work. Like Job. He did everything right and it didn't work. And Protestants blame themselves or their God, and Catholics blame themselves or their God. To say, well, you just need to get more rooted in the church. Well, if God lets things like this happen, I don't know that I want to be rooted in the church. There's a real trouble there about what was your spiritual base. But like all therapy, getting people to talk through it, they'll begin to hear where they're blocked. My clients are smart. I mean, they'll hear it as fast as I hear it. When they start to say something and think, meh, meh, the buzzer goes off, I can't believe I really thought that. Or they'll start saying, I feel guilty all the time. I even feel guilty having sex. And to say, what do you think that's about? Because, well, like, I don't know, you know, do you think people who have died can see us? Oh, Mother Mike could see us have sex. You know, they'll hear it as fast as I hear it. That if the people we loved can see us, do we have to be on better behavior? Or if they're in that other place, don't they understand better than we do why we're doing what we're doing? And what are issues? It's always spiritual first aid because it puts us right at the spiritual questions of being a human being. When I talked about Jacqueline Kennedy and what she's shown us, think about newsreels and what judgments you have when you see these people grieve in other countries. You think they're kind of primitive. Lord. They are doing the appropriate thing. If some of you saw the movie Greystoke, the Tarzan movie of how he was raised with the apes, how we learned it on television, those of you who are not our age, how we learned this was Tarzan lets out this sort of war cry when he's going to get the poachers who are getting the elephants or something. In the movie, something I really liked about that, when the mother ape is shot, when he keeps picking up the arm and realizes this person is dead, this one I called my mother is dead, that's when he screams through the jungle and is beating his chest. That is an appropriate response. That is the natural response to death, is to scream. Is to scream and rage and pull your hair. And Jews, or any of you Jewish, you rend your garments for the grieving period. You have to tear your garment every day that you have been ripped apart. When we see Iranians throwing themselves on the casket, that's what we want to do. No, don't take them away. But it's really just not very American civilized to do that. If some of you have lived abroad, in France or Germany, people wear at least black armbands. So if you're standing in the cereal section, then you remember you don't need to get any cereal anymore. and you run out of the store at H-E-B, people think, weird. If you have this on your arm, it says, cut her a lot of slack, bless her heart. She's grieving, and you wear that at least the 365 days. Some of you come from cultures where your grandmothers wore the black forever. It's always, you never get over it. You just get used to it. And that is healing. You get used to it. But this culture also doesn't want to talk about anything dead. Even the topic is taboo. What is the makeup for? So they won't look dead. But they are dead. How are you going to get out of shock and denial? The reason Protestants in this country are in such bad shape is that our funeral rituals have gone to, you get a phone call, so-and-so's died, you go to the church, there's a closed box, and then you go home. And you leave the cemetery before they do anything with the box. It's just up there with all the flowers, and then we go home. That's how you can stay in shock and denial. Jews aren't in much shock and denial. Their custom is you go to the funeral home and you bathe the body. I know, I'm going to go, it's not, or most Hispanics open the casket. You aren't going to have a lot of shock and denial if you saw it. You need to see that it really is true. People will harbor for it. What are the MIA families doing? They've never seen the body. That's why they hang on to the hope it might have been. I've worked with women who have had a stillborn and they never saw the baby. And 15 years later, they still imagine maybe the doctor gave it to somebody that was a better person or had more money or something. They never saw. But when I say it, when I show the film at the nursing school where you bring the body of the baby to the mother and let her see it, that it was a perfect little baby. It just couldn't make it. It's hard to watch the film, but when it's your baby, you can move a person quickly out of shock and denial and start getting this direction. But we don't even like dead grass. We put AstroTurf out. We don't even want grass to be dead. We're so freaked out. What is the makeup for? The AstroTurf, all the euphemisms. They passed away. They died. What we tell children, they went to sleep. Grandpa went on a long trip. You set up some incredible things there. No wonder the child has sleep disturbances. You know, or Grandpa was so wonderful, was such a good person that Jesus took him home. Then you're not a good person. Or if you're good enough, maybe you'll get taken home too. A lot of crazy stuff goes around that. And we're children too, but we need to all be told the truth. What happened? Really what happened? And this culture doesn't help us with it. I really don't think I would have a job anyplace but the United States or Great Britain probably. The one time I've seen someone who was not of this culture at all was when we bombed Libya. And on military bases, the commanding general, or the commanding person goes and tells his family. And they brought this family to me who had about a week before declared American citizenship, and they were so proud of being Americans. And the next week we bombed their entire remaining family in Libya. And I said to this man, what did you do when your commanding officer told you what had happened? And he looked really embarrassed. And he said, well, my wife, she fell to the ground and she started screaming, and I lay down on top of her spread eagle and began to scream in rhythm with her. I thought, y'all are going to need to see me 2 or 3 times. I mean, just let me tell you what you're probably going to go through, what kinds of things are normal. Let me normalize it for you. Because what Americans say is, I say, what did you do when the doctor told you that your father had died on the operating table? And people say, oh, well, I thanked him for doing everything he could. Like, y'all are going to need to come for quite a while. Or I say, what'd you do when you got home? Well, we started calling the relatives. When are you going to scream? When are you going to rage? When are you going to have some kind? When are you, like Tarzan, going to start screaming and pulling your hair? Your life has changed forever, and it's never going to be the same. But you'll get used to it. I think the best story that I know about how you help people, and I don't just mean how I help my clients, I mean how you help yourself and your family members, is there's a story of a little boy about 4. 4 is about the time you are old enough to negotiate with your father, but you aren't old enough to follow through on it. And this little boy wants to know from his father, can he go down to the end of the block and play with his little friend. And his father said, yes, you can, but when I call you, you have to come right away. And so the little boy goes down, and you know where this story goes. He goes down to play with his little friend, and at an appropriate amount of time in the father's time frame, he calls for him to come, and the little boy doesn't come. And he thinks, this will be a learning experience when he gets back. And he says to him, when I called you, you didn't come. Now, didn't we have an understanding you were to come right away when I called you? And he said, well, when I got down there, he was crying because his tricycle was broken, and so I had to stay and help him. And the father said, you want me to believe at 4 years old that you were going to help him fix his tricycle? He said, no, I was helping him cry. And that is what we should do with our friends and with ourselves. It's what I do professionally. Help people really cry. Help them really grieve. The grief is the problem, and grieving it is the solution. Every time you, and if you also look linguistically at our culture, I wish I knew Spanish better to say, there are no nice words for crying. She broke down. Well, that's a helpful, she cracked up, she lost it. There are no words to say she really felt her pain. There's no phrase here. I work with nurses, so they say, well, that's what the linen room's for, you better go down there. The problem's not what's wrong with those of us who lose it, break down, crack up. What is wrong with a culture that has no phraseology that's positive for you really feeling your pain, really experiencing your experience? The appropriate response to a grief and loss is tears, is shock and anger and tears and terrible depression. That's the appropriate. If you're going to get to here, you have to come through here. There ain't no other door out. Grief is the problem, and really grieving it's the solution. And you won't get to this place until you can, between that second and third year, you'll start to recall things about that person or about that issue. And it'll be bittersweet, but it's more sweet than bitter. You get used to the fact that this is how your body looks after that surgery. Now, there are just a couple of men here, but I want to read this one. He told me that he called because he was concerned about his wife. It had been 5 months since their child died, and she wasn't doing very well. No kidding. I asked him what she was doing that bothered him, and he said that she cries all the time, and that she wants to talk about the child all the time, and that she wasn't sleeping well, and that she'd stopped eating, and a good part of the night she wandered around the house. In fact, spent a lot of time at the cemetery or in the child's room, and she just wasn't doing very well. And then I asked him how he was doing. He told me he was doing fine, that he was working 13, 14 hours a day. He usually didn't work that much, but he had in the last couple months. Said he didn't need to talk about the child or look at the pictures. He'd put that behind him. It was over. He accepted it, and he was going on, and he wished she'd do the same. Sleep, I asked. He said, well, he slept fine. He had a few drinks before he went to bed, and if he woke up in the night, he'd take a tranquilizer. Now, if she's doing so badly, and he's doing just fine, why am I worried about him? Men are the ones around death who really, in fact, those of us who worked in hospitals and settings, you usually ask, if the wife answers the phone, you usually ask for the husband, because they'll react better. That means they won't react. Now, who knows what she'll do? I mean, she may scream, she may start crying, she may actually feel her experience. But we can count on you guys. Y'all will do the manly thing. You'll say, thank you very much for calling, I appreciate that. And go, oh dear. But we've been taught this. This culture is really constipated. It's amazing. We don't want to talk about anything. What do you do when somebody comes back to work and you know they've had a loss? Try not to, just smile at them. Try not to say anything because they might start crying, or, what if you said the wrong thing means they might start crying. Even with nurses, I have to work with them on this. When I arrive on a floor, somebody will say, he's not going to die on my shift, is he? It's like, why do you not want to be there for that? Often people die on the old nurse's shift. They always die on Louise's shift because Louise isn't afraid of death. She's settled. It's not about nursing. She's settled her issue about what it means that she's mortal. She's worked through why she thinks there's suffering on the planet, what she thinks about immortality. Nobody wants to let go in the presence of people who are afraid. But what even the nurses are saying to me, they say, well, I don't like to go down there because I just don't know what to say. There's nothing we can do. Well, to me, nursing is, nursing when you can get a cure is very technical. You just carry out the doctor's orders. Dying is nurse intensive. All you can do is care for them. That's all there is to it. But they'll say, I don't know what to do. You know, I'll probably say something wrong. And when I say, what does that mean? They say, well, you know, I don't want them to cry or something. What are we saying to ourselves and to everybody else when we do that? People stand outside the hospital room, and I'll stop and talk with them. They say, I'm trying to get up my strength to go in there. I don't want to cry. It's very sad. Why don't you say the truth? Why don't you say, Dad, it's so hard to come here and see you like this. I can't do anything to help you. That would be real. But instead we say things like, you're going to be out pretty soon. And it's all going down here. Psychology is really the same as medicine. If you eat something that's toxic, your body knows to throw it up. But you can keep from throwing up. But it's going to rip your guts apart. And emotions have to happen the same way. If you really are feeling great anger or great depression or great pain around these issues, they need to come up. And when you put them out there and say it, it's soothing. It's very soothing. So I encourage you with people to be like the little boy. Help your friends and yourself cry, to really experience what's happened to you. The number of griefs, when I start the semester, it's amazing. I mean, with 30 people in a class at a nursing school, I have never finished a semester without 2 or 3 people having a death in their family, but without maybe a third of the class discovering that they never realized that a miscarriage was a death. No kidding. And it isn't dealt with that way. People start saying all these things to shut you down. Oh, you'll have more children. That means don't cry. Don't start talking about it. Or that people didn't realize that having hysterectomy, if you weren't settled with the number of children you wanted to have, is a loss issue. It's a real grief and loss. Losing a promotion is. It's a tremendous assault and grief and loss on the ego. Do you have questions you want to ask me about grief and loss? Remember, you're not on the camera, only I am. Only I'm under the gun.
Excuse me.
Yes?
What about if the family's expecting a death? Where do they usually stay, like the children?
Depends on how much involvement you have. If everybody stays away from the hospital, you're going to be here a long time. We're all going to pretend it's not really happening. The more you really care for that person, you can make that a healing. Sometimes I'm hired by families to say we need, with the dying person, to get them resolved, to say all those I'm sorry's, I forgive you, I really love you, to finish for the dying person things that they haven't done or said, to work through their grief about their lives, things they didn't accomplish that they thought they would. But even to say when you know it's coming, when it actually happens, you will still do this again. You still, the next day, think you need to go up to the hospital. You don't need to go to the hospital.
And how long do they stay depressed? 6 to about 24 months. Almost 2 years. Of course, it depends on how important the person is to you. And there are things that bump it. As I said, lawsuits will really throw the thing into a mess. If there's fighting among the family about who gets what. And sometimes I've listened to the whole family dilemma, though, and I thought this was maybe the way the family was working through their anger, was for everybody to get mad about who's getting what, and that way we don't have to be mad at God because the person died. But even when you know it's coming, they'll still be shocked that it actually happened, and you knew it was happening. It'll be a roller coaster for about 2 to 3 years before the family gets back to normal. And the more tradition you have around your funeral, the easier the family. It is better to see the body. It seems to psychologically help you stop denying, although we don't like to do that in this culture. I certainly don't force people to do it, but they ought to know the library of knowledge we have that seeing the body helps. Whatever it is that helps. Funeral director, I give this talk to funeral directors a lot, how to make the funeral part of the healing, because the more antiseptic it is, the less healing. That's why blacks and Hispanics still have just enough to assist them with it. Protestants are in real big trouble about funerals. There's just no ritual at all to it. Sometimes people need to put things into the casket. Sometimes people want to stay and actually see the dirt put there. Whatever, the funeral is to help you heal. Do you know, if anyone's Greek in this room, the way the Greeks used to do it in old times was they had paid, you hired the person to embalm, you hired some mourners, some professional theater people who came and created a big enough commotion by wailing and screaming and crying so that if you broke down, it didn't show. And it was very helpful. Greeks now don't have to hire mourners, but their ancestors all know when there's a funeral, you go, and what your job to do while the family's over there is to really cry and make enough commotion. But what you see in white Anglo-Saxon Protestant funerals is everyone is doing this. So if there's any sniveling, we know where it is. Came right from there. And so they all stand there like Jacqueline Kennedy doing this, saying, you know, they didn't break down, lose it, or crack up. The more ritual that you go through, the 40-day ritual, some of you had, that you assemble again on the 40th day, that in the Christian ethos it takes 40 days for the spirit to leave the earth plane altogether, and on the 40th day to have another gathering of these people to see that you really are all right, you're all still here. Had this beautiful little boy who said to me, one thing I always start with a grieving person is saying, where do you think your loved one is? Because whatever they tell me, then I know where next to turn. If they say, I'm afraid just in the ground, then I need to start here. If they say, with Jesus now, then we'll go over here. And I had this beauty, he was 9 years old, and I said, where do you think your mother is? He said, it doesn't matter. I said, well, what do you mean it doesn't matter? He said, she's just not enough here. That's really, it doesn't matter to say, well, don't you think your dad's with Jesus now and everything's fine? Doesn't solve my problem. He's not enough here for me. You know, that's another thing, whether they're safe. They're not enough. That was from a 9-year-old. Do you have any other questions? I've got 2 minutes. Yes, sir.
Do you think it's good for children to see the body?
Yes.
How old, how young, I guess?
Now this will freak you out, but you're really getting it for someone who studies this. About 4 or 5. The age, the damage I see with people our age who come to therapy, and sometimes a distorted grief is when you have someone just died and somewhere you're stuck in one of these places. It's usually, what was the first death? It was some other death that didn't get all the way to here, and you can't go on to bargain or to get your anger because when you were 5 or when you were 12, and the story I hear most often is either you were not allowed to go to the funeral when you really knew what was happening and you needed to have one more, or you were forced to go to the funeral. So the operative word is allowed or forced. My experience is you tell the children, even if they make the wrong decision, even if 20 years later they're at my office saying, you know, my mother let me go to the funeral and it wasn't good, they made the decision. And what I've found is if you will explain to them what's going to happen, don't make decisions for them. You don't know how they're feeling. Say, Grandma has died, and this is what we do. We all want to assemble one more time and say goodbye to her, but it's very emotional, and lots of people cry, and Mommy might be crying too. And do you want to go with us and do that? See Grandma one more time. Now, she is dead now. And that's when they can ask it, what does that mean? Say, well, all the things that we can do, gesture with our hands, they can't do anymore. Open our eyes, they can't do. It's a time you can talk with the child. But if you say, do you want to go do that? Because also, Uncle Ben's going to stay at the house here. And if you want to stay here with Uncle Ben, we'll just be gone a couple hours. You can watch TV, you can play with your toys. But either way, would you like to go with us or would you like to stay here? And let them say what they want. Even if you say, oh Lord, I took him and he got real frightened, then comfort him. He is doing normal grief. He got real frightened. We're all real frightened. And he said right in the middle of it, Mommy, am I going to die? Isn't that what we're thinking there? I'm going to be there. They will act out you can talk with them. I think 4 or 5 is the age at which you can explain to them and ask them more than anything. Let them decide what they'd rather do. I can tell you from the point of view of having seen a lot of natural death now, when I alluded to Mother Teresa, it is safe to leave your body. It really is safe, and you may find that a real paradox to say. But if we did things more naturally, I think the safest place in the world to be, if you can get cured, is an American hospital. But I think the most dangerous place to be when there's nothing we can do is an American hospital. Because we're going to save you for every breath you can get. And very few of us want every breath we can get. What I saw, in the same way that you don't have to tell yourself to throw up if you drank too much or ate too much, your body knows to do that. It knows how to back out. Really does naturally. And I believe in the next 5 or 6 years you will see dying people going home. I think our country is really about to make a strong left here. I think hospitals are going to become a place where you are rushed for emergencies, that people aren't going to stay there when they're really sick and there's no more we can do. But cut yourself slack. Remember, the crazy behavior under crazy circumstances is normal. In fact, acting normal when crazy things have happened will make you sick. Grieve your grief. Thank you.